Good evening, and it's indeed a honor and a privilege to be speaking to everybody here today in California. Definitely good to be out on the West Coast here, talking about issues and things that are very, very important to our nation. You know, there was a recent survey of Americans that came out, and the survey said that 74% of Americans believe this nation is headed in the wrong direction. 74%. That is alarming. That's really, really alarming and concerning. Tonight, I want to talk about restoring the American dream. When I was growing up, we had a great president. And I think all of you out here in California know who this gentleman is. A president by the name of Ronald Reagan. In his 8 years in the White House, President Reagan brought back a sense of pride in our nation. He brought back a sense of patriotism to this country that it needed badly. Now, want you to flash back to the 1980s. Let's pretend it's 1979, 1978. And the nation at that time, we had high unemployment, high gas prices, the Iranian hostage crisis. Now, flash forward to today. We're seeing some of those same headlines being played out on the TV, on the cables, and on the news shows. What this nation needs, what it needs badly, is another Ronald Reagan. You know, during the last year, many people have called me a 2000s version of Ronald Reagan. And while I'm flattered by the comparison, and President Reagan and I, we share many of the same beliefs. There is only one Ronald Reagan. President Reagan often talked about patriotism. He felt it was important, as well as I feel it's important. I feel it's very, very important. A rebirth of our patriotism starts in our schools. Our schools must return the pledge and prayer to our schools immediately. This must happen immediately. For it's this action alone, that is the basis for the rebuilding of patriotism in our nation. When I was in high school, I had a government teacher who instilled a sense of patriotism in me. He taught me to believe in our government. And while he was from a different party, he never once tried to push his agenda on his students. His name was Bill Hickey. Our nation needs more Bill Hickeys. Our nation, coming up here in just a few short days, a few short weeks actually, we must elect leaders. We must elect leaders who do not endorse or support critical race theory. During the pandemic, too many politics got involved in our classrooms. Bottom line, our schools are there to teach. Our teachers are there to teach. And there's a lot of talk about what should be taught. And quite frankly, we should teach the history of this country. Good, bad, ugly, or indifferent, we must teach the history of this country. For it's teaching the history of our nation, which had its troubles, it's had its past. By teaching that, we can do our best to prevent that from happening in the future. We must elect leaders that are against the liberal, progressive agenda of the Democratic Party. You know, one of my favorite TV shows I love that show to death. It's a show called West Wing. Remember that show? In that show, Rob Lowe, his character name was Sam Seaborn on the show, talks about education. And I want to quote Rob or Sam. He says, "Education is a silver bullet. Education is everything. We don't need little changes. We need gigantic, monumental changes. Schools should be palaces. Competition for the best teacher should be fierce. They should be making six-figure salaries. Schools should be incredibly expensive for government and absolutely free of charge to its citizens, just like national defense. Just like national defense." Now, think about it. Our nation's students are our national defense. For it's in today's classrooms, we are molding the next generation of leaders. It is in our classrooms that we are getting the scientists, the engineers, the lawyers, the doctors. The future of this country rests in our schools, and it's time to invest in our schools. You know, this show was done about 20 years ago, and this item that Rob Lowe or Sam Seaborn is quoted saying they were trying to push an education bill through. And let's look at the numbers on this. Every year, our nation, we have a $770 billion budget, $770 billion in defense. Right now, we spend $750 billion in education. $750 billion in education. That's a $20 billion difference. That's real close. We can match the spending on education just like defense. We also have close to $190 billion, with a B, $190 billion in unspent COVID money. That's sitting in DC. It's time to use that. Why don't we put that money to use for education and do it now? There's too many classrooms in this country, too many schools in this country that need help. And $190 is sitting in our nation's capital. Let's put it to use. Let's put it to use for this. Let's try to match the spending that we spend on defense. And let's spend that just about that much, or if not more, on our education. We have to do this. Today, the Democrat Party of President Bartlett, who was the president of West Wing, is nothing like the Democratic Party of today. Today's party is endorsing a far left wing agenda, something this nation does not need. When it comes to government spending, the Democrats want more government and entitlements. I stand for less government and the end of social welfare. During the last 2 years, our nation has experienced a pandemic not seen in many years. Matter of fact, since the Spanish flu, many government assistance programs were put in place. They needed to be at the time. We were we were facing something that we had no knowledge of, information of, and we had to find out how to go about combating this pandemic. And the only way to do it at that time was to shut down the economy. It had to be done. Now, fast forward 2 years later, our nation is seeing decreasing numbers in infections. Hospitalizations are way down. And it's almost as if we're almost back to normal, not quite, but we're almost back to the way we were in early 2020. My fellow Americans, it's time for us to go back to work. It really is. It's been 2 years. I understand. I get it. I understand the concerns at the beginning, but we must continue living. Life of this nation must continue. Just the other day, I stopped by a local restaurant back home in Texas. As I went to open the door was locked. A sign simply said, "Closed for 1 hour due to staffing shortage." You know, there are 10.2 million jobs available in this country. 10.2 million. Like I just said, it's time for us to go back to work. It is time for every able bodied citizen in our nation to return to the workforce. You know, and where I was talking about education, talking about our schools, we're still rebounding from the pandemic. That was a shock to our education system. The latest information out there shows a drop in test scores on the benchmark test and our standards test. We learned during the pandemic that remote learning, while valuable during the early days of the pandemic, does not have a place in today's classroom. It does not have a place. It's a wonderful system that worked during the pandemic, but it's time for everyone to return to in school, in person learning. And most districts have done that. That's a good thing. Because, like I said again, we had the future of our nation in our classrooms. There was uh, a survey out, or somebody did some data about a year ago that says the pandemic's impact on education and on the economy is going to be felt for the next 50 or 60 years. And how they're going about doing that is they're actually counting the time that a child is in kindergarten all the way through his retirement or her retirement. Think about the learning deficit that's taken place. Think about the things they missed out on. There are so many important things that need to be made up. Um, the test scores. There's gaps in math. There's gaps in reading. There's gaps in our students who are being challenged in the lower end of the grade level. They need help. It is our obligation to help them. And under my administration, we'll do everything in my power to see that help is given to the schools. You know, the polarization we are seeing in our nation because of the pandemic and it's because of the politics of what's going on now in our nation, it must stop. It must stop. We must learn to respect each other once again and each other's opinion. We've come so divided. Hatred has increased across our nation. It really is time for this to come to a stop. You know, in our nation's 245-year history, 245 going on 246, we have achieved great things during a national crisis. Mankind's greatest achievement, his greatest achievement, was accomplished during the Vietnam War. And this state played a very important role in that. It was the Apollo moon landing program. We can once again achieve great goals during a pandemic only and only if we come together as one. Let's start respecting one another again. Let's reach out to our brothers and sisters and shake their hands. Let's once again become that nation that President Reagan talked about so often. He talked about a shining city on a hill. And we can do these things. We can achieve great goals. This nation has so many opportunities, so many possibilities, and we can achieve those goals if we come together as one. Let's start respecting one another again. Let's reach out to our brothers and sisters and shake their hands. My fellow Texan Tom Lee once said, I live on the east side of the mountain. It's the sunrise side, not the sunset side. It's a side to see the day coming, not to see the day it's gone. So Let's start living on that sunrise side of the mountain to see what is coming, to see the day that's ahead of us. This country has many, many, many bright days ahead of us. And let's quit looking at the sunset. While it's beautiful, it's going to fade. The sunrise is coming. It's time for us to move ahead. Let's once again become that nation that President Reagan talked about so often, that shining city on a hill. In Matthew 5, verse 14, Matthew says, "You are the light of the world, like a city on a hilltop that cannot be hidden." My friends, in the word of Scripture, let us become what Matthew called the city on a hilltop that cannot be hidden. May God bless you. May God bless our troops. And may God bless the United States of America. Thank you all very much.